Well, thank you very much. I don't usually get that round of applause when I come to a room. Good evening, everyone. I'm Adam Tickell. I'm the University Vice-Chancellor. And it is a genuine and real pleasure to welcome you all to the 46th Baggs Memorial Happiness Lecture. As I'm sure many of you know by now, the history of this lecture is both interesting and unusual. It was made possible by the very generous bequest of an alumnus named Thomas Baggs in 1973. Thomas Baggs had a wide-ranging, very distinguished career in teaching, wartime journalism, and advertising, both here in the UK and in the United States, all of which gave him something of an insight into the nature of happiness. But he left us a bequest for a series of lectures to be delivered by, quote, suitably qualified persons, which has meant that we've welcomed a very diverse array of distinguished speakers. David Attenborough, Bernardine Evaristo, Yung Chang, Benjamin Zephaniah, who was sadly lost last year. And last year, unfortunately, I had COVID, so I was unable to be here for last year's speaker, Clem Farquharson. Each speaker has brought their own insights, and I think a very unique take on the theme of happiness. The lecture was the only brief really is a subject is a lecture on the subject of happiness. This evening we are genuinely delighted to welcome Michael Rosen. Michael Rosen, as you all know, is a renowned poet, writer, broadcaster, academic, and I'm sure he'll hate me saying this, one of the most beloved figures in English literature and national treasure. Michael's published widely for both children, for adults. There can't be a person in the house who hasn't taken their children on walks to they're going on children or grandchildren on walks to going on a bear hunt, and certainly when we took our children and they were flagging on a walk around Scotland, the way that you would revive them is that we'd open up a bear hunt and they would make the final couple of miles. And much more recently, Michael Rosen's sad book that addresses the complex nature of grief. Michael's bestseller, Many Different Kinds of Love, a story of life, death and the NHS, tells of his personal experience with COVID-19, capturing his reflections on care within the context of the pandemic. And as I'm sure you know, as Michael suffered from COVID for, I think, longer than anybody else. But last year he published Getting Better, which provides further insights into his continuing recovery. Of course, not to be restricted to the written word, his performance poetry has captured the imagination of children across the country. His YouTube channel has received an astonishing 145 million views. He holds a chair in children's literature at Goldsmiths, University of London, where he co-devised and teaches on their MA programme on children's literature. He served as Children's Laureate from 2007 to 2009, and this is a vital role, of course, for encouraging children to read for pleasure rather than just read because they have to. And of course, we will all be familiar with his absolutely beautiful voice from his performances and appearances on Radio 4. At the end of this evening's lecture, Michael's very kindly agreed to take questions from the room. So as you're listening, please do, if you have any questions, please do hold them in your minds. But for now, all that remains for me is to ask you to join me in welcoming Michael Rosen to deliver the 2024 Baggs Memorial Lecture, and for me to pose the question, what is happiness and how can it be achieved?
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tickell, for those very kind words, and hello, everybody. I'm going to start this talk in a strange place. I don't usually introduce things I've written with a warning, but as you've come today to a talk about happiness, I don't want you to be left in limbo thinking that I'm playing some kind of trick. So please, as you listen to this, can I ask you to think about the choices that my mother and father made, and perhaps speculate why they made those choices. So here goes. Me, my dad, and my brother, we're looking through the old photos. Pictures of my dad with a broken leg, my mum with big flappy shorts on, and me on a tricycle when we got to one of my mum with a baby on her knee. And I say, is that me? Or Brian, my brother. And my dad says, let's have a look. Oh, it isn't you or Brian, he says. It's Alan. He died. He would have been 2 years younger than Brian and 2 years older than you. He was a lovely baby. How did he die? My brother said. Whooping cough. I was away at the time, and he coughed himself to death in Connie's arms. The terrible thing is, it wouldn't happen today, but it was during the war, you see, and they didn't have the medicines. That must be the only photo of him that we've got. Me and Brian looked at the photo. We couldn't say anything. It was the first time we'd ever heard about Alan. For a moment, I felt ashamed, like as if I'd done something wrong. I looked at the baby, trying to work out who he looked like. I wanted to know what another brother would have been like. No way of saying. And Mum looked so happy. Of course, she didn't know when they took the photo that he would die, did she? Funny thing is, though, my father mentioned it every now and then over the years. Mum never. And he never said anything in front of her about it, and we never let on that we knew. What I've never figured out was whether her silence was because she was more upset about it than my dad, or less. As I said, I think what's involved here are some choices. My mother choosing never to mention Alan, never to talk about him. There were no photos of him in the house. There was no grave or mark that he had ever existed. Up until that moment, when I was about 11, I had no idea that there was an Alan. And then after that, nothing from my mother. My father was slightly different. Over the years, he did mention Alan, in particular, when my son died. I think this is about happiness. Because I think this is about happiness because part of being happy is about not being unhappy. And not being unhappy is sometimes about coping with sadness, sorrow, and loss. So what was my mother doing? Why did she vanish her second son, Alan? Well, because she didn't ever talk about it, I never got a chance to ask her that question. So I have to make guesses, perhaps not much more informed than you are, but I have some hints. Here's a scene. My father is explaining to us that when his mother, my father's mother, moved out of a flat in the White City flats, she left a trunk full of photographs and papers in the flat. When she went back to get the trunk, it had gone. He waves his hand in the air as if this is lost treasure, links to a past that has all gone. Then my mother intervenes. I can see she's cross. She frowns and says with an abrupt edge in her voice, "Why do you keep going on about this stuff? You can't do anything about it. You can't bring the trunk back." My father shrugs. I can see that he likes to dwell on these losses and regrets. Mum, not at all. She was just the same in the face of another thing my father used to say. You know, he would say, I had two uncles living in France. They were there at the beginning of the war, and they weren't there at the end. What happened to them, my brother and I would say. I don't know, he said. Maybe the camps. Again, this would irritate her. There's nothing you can do about it, she would say. Now let's jump forward 40 or more years, and my mum is facing her last days. She's in great pain from cancer that has spread to her lungs, sitting in bed at home. My father is beside himself. He knows that he's losing his lifelong partner, lover, and wife, who he's been with since he was 17. After a year of sleepless nights, false hopes, and despair, he's not coping. He breaks down. What does Mum do? She sends him out of the room. She doesn't want to see him crying. So he sits on the stairs outside the bedroom with some words in his head, something that my mother had just said to him. I was just unlucky, that's all. How do I know this? Because a few months ago, my stepmother, my father's second wife, brought me up an envelope that had a piece of my father's writing in it. For a while, I didn't open it. I thought it was one of my father's lectures, which are always interesting, but need a couple of clear hours to read, understand, and think about. But a few days ago, I opened the envelope properly and read the first line, which said he was writing this piece just a few hours after my mother had died. He writes that he has to do this before he forgets it. Here it is. I should ask myself, my father writes, why I need to set this down. This being my last hours with Connie. Why this desperate impulse to get it right, to say what happened? In the first place, I feel I might forget, and for some reason or other, I do not want to forget. Yet what I'm going to set down should be forgotten, shouldn't it? Blurred, distant, and distanced, anyway. Again, I think of the difference. My mother refusing to dwell on this moment in any kind of sharing way, dismissing my father's sadness. She was just unlucky. Later, and afterwards, of course, my father pores over it, putting down the details of the medicines, the smells, the expressions on our faces, the look on my mother's face. As he said, he had to write it down so that he wouldn't forget it. So my mother's philosophy must have been something like this. Get on with it. Move on. Don't get dragged back into the past. Don't dwell on it. It won't help you live now. My father writes that he's got to get the past right. If you know anything at all about what I've been writing about for the last 60 years, you'll know that I've leaned much more towards my father's way of thinking than my mother's. That said, please let me make clear that I'm not going to say tonight that what I'll talk about is the right way. That's not going to be the point. So what is the point? The point is that I'll try to give you a sense of what I do to find and make happiness. At the same time, I want you to feel as free to think something I say is as helpful as it might be unhelpful. That what I say is something you can use, or on the contrary, that what I say is no good for you. After all, being dictated to is surely not a great way to feel happy. Here goes then. A few months ago, my daughter, she's 23, is standing in the kitchen. I'm sitting at the table, and she says, "You, Dad, are an optimistic nihilist." It came out of the blue, and at first I didn't get what she meant. I know what the two words mean on their own, optimistic and nihilist, but what do they mean when they're put together? She explained, "You're a nihilist because you don't believe in God or anything supernatural, but you're hopeful. You go about doing stuff, hoping that things will work out." I got it. Yes, I knew there was a good reason why we agreed with her when she was 18 that it would be a great idea to go to university. Anyway, ever since she said that to me, I've tried to figure out how or why I'm optimistic. The nihilist bit is what it is. I just go about life not bothered that there's anything beyond that is any kind of guidance or purpose or source of meaning. In fact, my view is quite different. I actually think that our existence is without purpose. There is no point to it. Now, I know this is disconcerting or depressing for some, but not at all for me. I find quite a lot of satisfaction in thinking that I'm no more significant than a dandelion. The other day, Sir Chris Hoy, who knows as much, if not more than all of us, what it means to come face to face with what it's all for, said this, quote, "Nobody lives forever. Our time on this planet is finite. Don't waste your time worrying about stuff that isn't that important. Focus on the things that are." So I'll park the nihilism there and turn to the optimistic bit. When I ponder about that, I'm sent back to my childhood and the kind of home that my parents made for my brother and me. I can express this with some big abstract words that don't convey much of the taste and feel of it. So I might say that my parents come over to me in my mind now as people, quote, committed to progress. Very abstract. Everything they did was based on the idea that my brother and I, they themselves, and the children and university students they taught could and should progress. None of us should tread water, stagnate, go backwards. But progress with what? What was the means of progress? I think in their minds it was something to do with knowledge. As I say, that's all very abstract, so let's put some flesh on it. Both my parents, my father more so, were very keen, perhaps too keen, that my brother and I should do well at school. They each had ways of provoking us into getting on. I might come home from school with some bad marks and I'd be spotted, maybe dodging doing my homework. What did my mother say? She'd say, you don't want to end up like the Michelsons. I'd never heard of the Michelsons. Why was she talking about these people? She says, the Michelsons were so poor they lived in a single room in a tenement. This was in East London in the 1930s. What was a tenement? We lived in Pinner, a suburb in northwest London. We didn't have tenements in Pinner. Mr. Michelson was so poor, Mum says, he was just a schlepper. A schlepper, I say? What's a schlepper? He didn't even have his own market stall, she says. He was just the man who schlepped the stuff from the lockup to someone else's market stall. He was just a schlepper. Mum, I say, there aren't any market stalls in Pinner. There isn't even a market, let alone any schleppers. I'm not going to end up being a schlepper, Mum. Do your homework, she says, or you'll end up like the Michelsons. There, a glimpse of my mother, a glimpse of progress. My mum was very glad we lived in Pinner. My father, less so. Me and him would go out for a walk round Pinner and he'd say, why do we live here? Why do we live in this place? And I'd say, I don't know. I'm 7. Sometimes he demonstrated progress as much by what he did as what he said. The Sunday dinner comes to an end. We sit at the kitchen table, weighed down by what we've eaten, the condensation running down the winter windows. My brother and I look at each other. We know what's in the air now. Who's going to do the washing up? We don't have a rota, but my parents, both being highly committed lefties, they believe that if there are jobs or chores that can be done by children, then we should do them. My father would say, in a mix of irony and threat, all for the collective. But my brother and I figured that the old man, as we called him, somehow or another wangled ways and means to get out of doing the chores that no one wants to do, like washing up. So sure enough, just as the plates and bowls and pots and pans are calling out to be washed, scrubbed and dried, the old man says in the tired, resigned, grunting version of his voice, must press on, Con. Con is my mother, Connie. Must press on, Con. And he gets up and walks out. My brother and I look at each other. We knew it. We knew it was coming. Must press on, Con. We act it out in our bedroom. Must press on, Con. Press on with what? My brother says. What's he pressing on with? And it was mysterious. My brother and I wonder, what's he doing in the other room? What's he pressing on with? Why is there a must about it? Must press on. Well, down through the years, I've come to realize that he was pressing on with progress. He was planning, marking, learning, studying, taking notes, writing talks, essays, lesson plans, on and on and on, pressing on. Later, my mother did exactly the same. She pressed on with courses and studying and researching. In fact, my mother and father pressed on together and wrote a book together about the language of primary school children. And they did the research for this and the writing of the book because they believed that it would help education, teaching, and children progress. That inspires me. But saying all this, I sense, misses out something big. It's harder to grasp because it's about process. The feeling of the everyday, the day-to-day, the texture and sensation of life in the kitchens and living rooms of our lives, or in the rooms of bed and breakfasts on holidays, or in our case, in the tents on camping sites. Yes, while we're in tents, yes. Part of the way my parents thought about progress was to go camping. What? Why did they believe in camping? Why did they insist that the boys, my brother and me, had to do this? Well, as a kid, I figured that it was connected to all the other lefty things they did. Was it in one of those musty books on their shelves? perhaps in Karl Marx's Das Kapital, it said, "You must go camping." And there was an extra bit, some kind of footnote where it said, "When you go camping, go somewhere where it rains a lot." So that's why we always ended up on the Welsh borders or the North York moors, and it rained every day for 5 weeks. Then one year our parents said, "We're going to France." And I thought, great, it's going to be baking hot all day, every day. We went to the Jura Mountains, and it not only rained every day, it rained every night. It rained non-stop for 5 weeks. But I think my parents thought it was doing us good. Wet sleeping bags, doing us good. A river flowing through the tent, doing us good. In the mornings, my father would remember his time in the American Army. He was an American citizen. The first thing we'd hear in the middle of Yorkshire would be my father shouting, "Hey, yous guys, shit, shine, shave, and shower." And walking. They were in love with walking. And if it wasn't hard enough to get out of a tent into Welsh drizzle, they had this idea that we should head out along paths, through woods, over hills. My father would have the map and say, "Look here, Con, there's a tumulus." What? What's a tumulus? Sure enough, after about 5 hours of trudging through the drizzle, my father would stop and say, "There, the tumulus." And in a field next to the road was just a lump. Something you would never notice, a round heap covered in grass. I looked at it. Is this what we came for? The old man was still excited. A tumulus. It didn't get much more thrilling than that, eh? Weeks later, my brother in the bedroom rucks up the blankets, puts on his dad's voice and says, "It's a tumulus, boys." But before I get too distant, contemptuous of this even, scroll through another 30 years, and I'm standing in a barn in the middle of the English countryside with my 2 sons, aged about 12 and 8, and I'm pointing at the ceiling, just about to say how extraordinary the beams and rafters are, and my younger son puts on his dad voice, that's me of course, and says, "Extraordinary. Look at the beams, boys. They could be at least 500 years old." Or, as my stepdaughter once said on one of these occasions, "You know, Dad, just because something's old doesn't mean it's good." Sobering stuff. Knowledge, progress, it seems to be written into me like DNA. But hey, I still haven't captured that everyday feel. Let me mention expressions. My mother is calling out for my father. "Rosie!" She shouts. That's him, Rosen, turned to Rosie. "Rosie!" No answer. She turns to us and says, "Ask your father what he's doing and tell him to stop it." My father, on the other hand, loved to repeat little sayings that he thought conveyed some truth. "Don't believe a rumor till it's been officially denied," he would say. They both spoke Yiddish, a language spoken by East European Jews, but they used it in different ways. My father would mutter curses under his breath. "Chalera sollst du nehmen." My mother would say, "Don't say that." And we'd say, "What did he say?" And my mother would say, "Don't tell them, Harold." Years and years later, I found that one means, "May you get cholera." What? In Pinner in 1955? When was the last time there was cholera in Britain? 1860? I don't know. Somewhere in my father's mind was this ancient curse from medieval Poland. "May you get cholera." Mum hated that. She said it reminded her of her uncles shouting at each other in the back room when they were playing cards. Again, she wanted to forget, not remember. Though saying that, she would walk into the bedroom that my brother and I shared, and scattered all over it are model aeroplanes, old socks, my brother's collection of beer mats. And she says, "This place is a Mishedamonk." "What?" I say. "What's a Mishedamonk?" And she says, "Well, this place," and walks out. Or she'd look at me as I'm leaving the house and say, "Don't go out looking like a schloch." And I'd say, "Well, what's a schloch?" And she'd say, "Well, the thing you don't want to be." And the corned beef. Yes, in 1960, there was an outbreak of typhoid in Latin America, in Argentina. They said that the typhoid had got into the corned beef. So we mustn't eat corned beef. There were announcements on the radio. Don't eat corned beef. Big ads in the paper. Don't eat corned beef. Don't eat Fray Bentos. That was one of the companies that made corned beef, Fray Bentos. Don't eat Fray Bentos. Now, some of you might be too young to know what corned beef is. It comes, let me explain, it comes in cans that you can't open. There's a little key at the top that you have to take off, so you lever it off and it breaks. But if it doesn't break, you take this key and you're supposed to slot it over a little tongue on the side of the can. You lift that up and it breaks. But if it doesn't break, you slot the key over it and turn the key. Now, you may do that with the key facing down from the tongue, so when you turn the key, your finger gets stuck. But if you do it the right way, with the key facing up, you turn the key round and round and round, winding up a kind of ribbon of metal till it breaks off halfway round, so you can't open the can. But if it doesn't break off, you wind it round and round till the end, and you lever up what is a kind of lid. You lever it up and cut your thumb. I've got a scar. You can investigate it later. I've got a scar on my thumb there. Now your job is to shake the corned beef out of the can, but the bottom is wider than the top, so you can't get it out, right? So you stick a fork into it and lever it out, and it mashes up the corned beef. Remember, you were going to slice it up and have it in a sandwich, and now it's just mush. Actually, if you do get it out, you have like a slimy brick. It's covered in slimy white lard. Lovely corned beef. And when you put it in your mouth, it sticks to the top of your mouth, and you put it in and go, oh. Anyway, in the 1950s, our parents loved corned beef. My father's one great dish was corned beef hash, corned beef and baked beans. As he stood by the cooker, he'd point to it and say, chazabapkis. And I'd say, what's chazabapkis? And he'd say, tiger's eggs. And I'd say, well, what are tiger's eggs? And he'd say, chazabapkis. And I'd say, what are chazabapkis? And he'd say, tiger's eggs. And that could go on for about an hour. Anyway, you get it. Corned beef was big in our house. And then this warning, don't eat the corned beef. Don't eat Fray Bentos. So my mother goes to the cupboard. It's stacked up with corned beef cans. She takes one down. She looks at it and she says, ooh, better not open that till the typhoid outbreak's over. Did she know? Was that a joke? I don't know. She was mysterious. She was very mysterious. She might be pouring me a drink, say, and then look up and say, tread softly because you tread on my dreams. What's that? That's W.B. Yeats, she'd say. W.B. Yeats? What's that? He's wonderful, she'd say. It seemed as if there was some kind of secret place where she kept something called W.B. Yeats, whatever that was. My father, meanwhile, he set about trying to reverse that stereotype that says you've never seen a Jewish plumber. He fancied himself as a dab hand at DIY. He had a toolbox. And at some point at the weekend, he'd say, must mend the door. Out would come the toolbox, but then hours later, when it was all going wrong, he had this exasperated thing he'd say, no job takes 2 minutes. I remember thinking, if you know that no job takes 2 minutes, why are you surprised that this job is taking 2 hours? And while he was sawing up a bit of wood, he'd suddenly look up and say, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day till the last. My parents used to have tiredness competitions. They both worked, so it would go something like this. Dad comes in and he goes, phew, I'm tired. And Mum says, you're tired. I'm tired. And Dad says, I've never been as tired as this. And Mum says, you don't know what tired is. I'll tell you what tired is. It's me. That's what tired is. And my dad says, I'm tired all over. It's in my legs. It's even in my head. And Mum says, my tired isn't just inside. Everywhere is tired. And Dad says, I haven't even begun to tell you how tired I am. And Mum says, I know how tired you are. You've told me, but you know something? You telling me you're tired makes me tired. And Dad turns to us and says, and that's it. No one understands how tired I am. No one listens. In the end, I get tired saying I'm tired. And Mum says, what you don't know is that before I was this tired, I didn't know a person could be this tired. If I'd known then how tired I was going to be, I wouldn't have let myself be this tired. And I'd say, anyone round here tired? Now, all these became family sayings. We'd repeat them to each other. Better not open that till the typhoid outbreak's over. No job takes 2 minutes. Must press on. Tiger's eggs. One reason for this was my brother. My brother was 4 years older than me, still is, and he took it upon himself to teach me everything that he had been taught. So when I was 8, he was trying to teach me French. That worked. And when I was 11, he was trying to teach me calculus. That was a disaster. But he was also a brilliant mimic. Take this, for example. If my father wanted us to be quiet, he didn't say shush. He didn't say be quiet. He didn't say shut up. All he did was put his hand up to the side of his face and say in a very quiet voice, it sounded as if there was some kind of terrible pain in the middle of his brain. He'd go like this. The noise. It's almost as if the palm of his hand was trying to reach inside his head to get at some awful thing in there. The noise. So maybe, my brother and I were going on a car trip. Dad's driving, Mum's next to him. Me and my brother in the back. This is before the days of seatbelts. And my brother says, there's an imaginary line down the middle of the back seat. I'm on this side, you're that side. You can't cross the line, Mick. I'm this side of the line, you're that side of the line. So I go, yeah, no, I got the point. There is a line. So there's a line, and you can't cross the line, he says. So I go, yep, no, I do know. No, there is a line. There's a line here. And then I go, na. And he says, you just crossed the line. And I said, no, I didn't. Na. He's going, Mum, Mick's crossed the line. And I said, I didn't. And my dad says, well, you probably know what he goes. The noise. And my brother used to imitate it. You've already seen that. And if I was, say, maybe making a racket in the bedroom or something like that, my brother would walk around the house going, the noise, like this. So it's breakfast, okay? And my dad, he couldn't stand any noise at breakfast. One little kind of, and you'd get the glare. Yeah? So he comes downstairs, sits in the chair, and opens up the newspaper. Yeah, just that. Remember newspapers? Anyway, yeah, we had a newspaper. So you'd open up the newspaper. 1 minute, you had a dad, and the next thing, you had a newspaper. What happened to Dad? I don't know. He turned into a newspaper last Tuesday, something like that. So it's like that. All apart from one thing. His hand would come out from behind the newspaper and somehow or other magically know where the coffee cup was. So the hand would come out like that, across the table to the coffee cup, and then come back behind the newspaper like that and drink the coffee. And me and my brother, we used to watch the hand. Like that. And one morning, my brother goes like this. If you can't lip read me, I said I could move the coffee cup. Okay, so my brother goes, I could move the coffee cup. And I go, no. And he goes, yeah. So he leans across, my dad behind the paper, and he goes, what have you two done with it? And there's my brother going. And then I don't know whether this ever used to happen to you, but there's a little voice came into my head, a little voice that said, you know what you could do now? What? You could play drums on the side of the table. And I went, no, just drive the old man crazy. No, you'd really like it though, you know. No, you could take the knife and the fork and you could play drums. No, what a great idea. So I took the knife and the fork and I went clink against the cup, clink, and the newspaper comes down and my dad goes, well, you know how he went. He'd go, the noise, but not before my brother on the other side of the table. He's going, the noise, like that. Anyway, there you go. My dad, to be fair to him, he laughed. He liked that a lot. So what do I learn from this? That you can write down the things that people say. In fact, I could write down the things my brother said when he was imitating my dad. That's why when I meet up with my brother, he says, hey, Mick, that's what he calls me. Hey, Mick, you know my poems you write? And what's going on? I guess I'm doing what my father said. I'm trying not to forget. Yes, I'm trying not to forget. I'm also trying to make sense of things. And writing is a way of trying to make sense of things. Let me put that in another way. If things don't make sense, it can be a way of being unhappy. Or to extend that, in making sense of things, it's a way of being happy. I've called it, in the past, release and relief. If you think of your brain as a balloon, when things don't make sense, it's as if they press against the walls of your brain like air in a balloon. If you let the air out, the pressure goes. Release and relief. Writing can be like letting the air out. Or another analogy, if there's a thing bothering me, it can feel like a ping pong ball bouncing around inside my head, but it can't get out. It bangs against the walls of my brain in there, so I have to let the ping pong ball out. That's the writing. That's the release and relief. I'll give you some examples. You can all think of moments of friction between you and, say, your parents, or a brother or sister, grandparents, uncles, aunts. It could be a moment, a day, a week, a month, or even years and years, can't it? I won't mention partners or spouses. Mostly, I've been very lucky and staying with my parents, mostly without anything big or traumatic with them. The one area of friction when I was in my late teens, and it was over what I was going to study. For my first years at secondary school, I'd done languages rather than science. French, German, and Latin. But we had to do one science, and I chose biology. The big plan for me is to go into the sixth form and do English, French, and history. So there I am, age 16, and I'm thinking aloud one day, and I say, it's funny, isn't it? I really like biology, and yet I'm going to drop it. I like biology. Big mistake. I'm saying to my Jewish parents, I like biology. 4 eyes swivel on me. You like biology? You could be a doctor. You see, they had some kind of league table of what it means to be a worthy person. They both came from working class families and were very proud that they'd got scholarships and become teachers. Teaching was good. You could help people progress, remember? But above teaching in their minds was being a doctor. There was something wonderful about making people better. You're ill, you go to see a doctor, the doctor makes you better, blam, just like that. Now, above that was not any kind of doctor, but a Jewish doctor. Not because Jewish doctors are better than non-Jewish doctors, but to their lefty minds, communist minds, perhaps there was something really good about going beyond being Jewish and doing this good stuff for anyone and everyone. If you were a Jewish doctor, you could go anywhere in the world and mend a leg. In their minds, it transcended their Jewishness. But one step above that was being a Jewish communist doctor. You were proving that communism was right, even though by then they'd proved that communism, or Soviet communism, was wrong. Anyway, back with that moment when I said, fatal mistake, I like biology. It was like a light went on. The boy likes biology. Michael could become a Jewish communist doctor, and to prove it, I was whisked round to see their favorite Jewish communist doctor. He explained that I could carry on doing English, French, and history, but then I could do something special. I could do a course at a medical school called First MB, which taught people how to start from scratch with no science education, how to do science for medicine. And that was the plan for Michael. If you want to be happy, always beware of people who've got plans for you. Even if they're good plans, and if they're their plans, it may well be wrong for you. It's like they're nice clothes, but because someone else wore them before you, you feel a bit odd wearing them. That's how it was. Almost straight away from the time I agreed to do this first MB, I got to thinking it was a huge mistake. And to be fair to me, I did flag it up, even as I was doing A-level, French, history and English. Then later, as I was doing first MB. But no, each time I said, I'm not happy. See, I did say that. My parents told me how wonderful it was going to be that I was going to be a doctor. I tried saying how I was no good at it. I couldn't remember the metabolism going on in the liver, or what a dissociation curve was. No matter, my father said, just because you're no good at something, there's no reason to not do it. What? How did that make sense? Then I had a ruse. My brother was at Oxford University. He told me that one of his friends changed course, and it was dead easy. Not like at other universities, like trying to switch from being at medical school to another part of the university, so I got into Oxford. And I was up to my eyes in benzene rings and carotid arteries. And I was getting more and more unhappy. And as you do, I told my girlfriend at the time. Now, it so happens that her father was my dad's boss, who my father respected enormously. And it so happens that my girlfriend told her father, who then told my dad that Michael is unhappy doing medicine. And overnight, my father changed. After more than 3 years of telling me that I had to do medicine, he came to me and said that he was very, very sorry that he had made me carry on with medicine. What did I want to do? I said, English. And he laughed. He said, well, that's just books about books. And I said, yeah, but it's what you've been doing all your life. He said, true. Now, how did you change course just like my brother said? Well, at Oxford, you had to tell the boss of your college. In my case, at Wadham College, this was the warden. Makes it sound a bit like a dog's home, but anyway. The warden at this time was someone quite extraordinary. He was called Sir Maurice Bowrer. He was renowned throughout Oxford and beyond for saying outrageous things, talking in a very odd way where his voice boomed out and went up and down at the end of a sentence. And he was famous for being very liberal with students' indiscretions. Here are some stories about Sir Maurice. He got to hear of some people getting married. Lovely couple, slept with them both. There was, maybe there still is, a part of the river in Oxford where men only, go swimming naked. A woman came by on a punt and the men were doing naked sunbathing on the riverbank. So they grabbed their towels and hats and put them on over their middles. Sir Maurice grabbed his hat and put it over his face and then said, I don't know how you're known in Oxford, but I'm known by my face. Or there's the one about getting into the college after the gates had closed at night. Sir Maurice was known to leave his door open. This was because there was a way you could climb up the wall, across a roof, into his house, which was in the corner of the quadrangle, through his living room, down the stairs, and out through his door, which he left open, into the quadrangle. So one night, one student was doing this, and as he got to the living room, he saw that Sir Maurice was in there and was just getting off the sofa to go to bed. The student ducked down behind the sofa. But Sir Maurice stopped going to bed, came back to the sofa, opened a book, and started reading it. He went on reading it for several hours with the student hiding behind the sofa, behind him. Then finally, Sir Maurice got up, and just as he went out of the door, he said, turn the light out before you go. So, this is who I had to see if I wanted to change course. I'd already flagged this up with my tutors. Bear that in mind when you hear what happens later. The way it worked was that you had to ring Sir Maurice and ask to see him. This is how it went. You rang, he picked up the phone. Bowrer. Hello, Sir Maurice. It's Michael. It's Michael Rosen. Could I please meet you to discuss changing Tuesday, 4 o'clock? And then he put the phone down. It's just that. None of the usual niceties. No alternative times given. My father decided that this was as much his business as mine and set about preparing a speech that he was going to give to Sir Maurice. My father was schooled in the ways of the University of London, where everything had to be produced in triplicate carbon copies, and the answer was always no. A lot of work would have to go into convincing Sir Maurice, he figured. We turned up on Tuesday at 4, sat down, Sir Maurice looked at me. That's how he talked. I said, I would like to change course. He said, from what to what? Why did he say that? I bet he knew, because my tutors would have told him. Anyway, never mind that. So I said, from medicine to English. And he said, can you write a sentence? And I said, yes, I think so. So then he turned to my father, and he said, what do you think of this? So my father opened his folder and got ready with his speech. I think that in many ways, Michael has, and Sir Maurice says, good, convince your father, convince anyone. You'll have to start again, another 3 years, we haven't got any money, £50, goodbye. And that was that. My father and I staggered out of the room with my father stroking his forehead, repeating over and over again, extraordinary, extraordinary. So then I started my university career all over again, doing English. What do I make of this? Well, one thing is that it was hard to find a way to be happy about what I wanted to do. For more than 2 years, possibly 3 years, I was very unhappy with what I was either going to do or was actually doing. Then through a mix of luck, coincidence, persistence, and the way my father was ultimately prepared to listen to someone, I got to be where I wanted to be. I've also learned that by telling that story, and many of the stories I tell, I can exorcise the demons. What do I mean by this? I mean that retelling is a way of managing memories so that they don't hurt, or at the very least, so they don't make me unhappy. And I can tell you I've had to do that several times in recent years. Let's try this one. In 1981, I was diagnosed with a very strange illness. In the previous 12 years or so, I'd noticed several but unconnected things about myself. Not one of them, on their own, were ones that you could go to the doctor with. So I noticed that my eyelids were puffy. Well, you can't go to the doctors and say, hey, I've noticed my eyelids are puffy. Or the kids at the school I'm working with say, hey, Mr. Rosen, you aren't half white. Well, they were actually black, but anyway. Or I feel very, very cold. Or I find it really hard to walk uphill on Hackney Marshes. Hackney Marshes, there are no hills on Hackney Marshes. It's completely flat. In the end, I did go to the doctors complaining that my eyes were leaking. He said it was conjunctivitis, and he gave me some yellow gunk to put in my eyes. Every day I squeezed yellow gunk into my eyes, no good. I went back 3 weeks later saying they're still leaking. So he did a blood test and said that my kidneys didn't look too good. So imagine the picture. I arrive in the renal unit at St. Bartholomew's Hospital to see Mr. Baker, a very alert, brisk man. He says, what were you doing this morning? Now, you've got to imagine me now with a big white moon face, swollen eyelids, lips like those lips that some women now get done for themselves. Sorry about that. Big sausage fingers, my hair fluffed up like an afro, a great big beard, and my voice is deep, slow, and slurred. I've heard recordings of it. Nice to see you. My name is Michael Rosen. That's how I used to speak. So I say to Mr. Baker, I'll do it again. I was out with some school students writing poems. We saw a dead dog. Mr. Baker is staring at me. Finally, he says, these notes are rubbish. There's nothing wrong with your kidneys. You're hypothyroid. Now, that might not have meant very much to many people in my situation. But remember, I had done those months of medicine. And the moment Mr. Baker said that, I thought of my physiology textbook. On one page, there was a picture of a woman with a big white moon face. She was the before. Then next to it was a picture of the same woman after treatment for hypothyroidism, and she had shrunk down to a narrow, boned face. And the moment I remembered those two photos, I did a great yawning reach back through the previous 12 years, thinking of all the micro symptoms I mentioned, all of which were now connected into one illness. But, and here's the really unhappy bit, into my mind came what seemed like hundreds of decisions I'd made, which had involved me saying to myself, I can't do that because I'm too slow, or I'll get cold, or I'm not strong enough. I can remember ducking out of going on film shoots, of taking the offer of directing a TV show or a film and so on, many others. I suddenly felt overwhelmed by it. But Mr. Baker was very, very excited. He said, "This is fantastic. I'm going to call in the students." And in they came. "What's he got?" says Mr. Baker. "Kidneys, sir." One says. Baker is furious. "Just because we're on the renal unit doesn't mean that he's got kidney failure. I'm going to go out for He's turned it into John Cleese, hasn't he? Sorry, anyway. "I'm going to go out for a few minutes, find out what he's got." He went out. One of the students came over to my ear. "What have you got?" I said, "I don't think I'm allowed to say." Baker was back in. "What's he got?" "Kidneys, sir." "No! You haven't taken his pulse." "Look, no pulse. No pulse. You haven't tested his reflexes." Bang! He whacks my knee. "Look, nothing. You haven't felt his skin. Cold, clammy. Look at his sausage fingers." Mr. Rosen, walk across the floor, heel to toe, heel to toe. "Look, he can't do it. He's 35 and he can't do it. What's he got?" "Kidneys, sir." "No! He's hypothyroid." Anyway, they sent me off for a blood test, and a few days later, I was back, and I was now in the metabolic unit, face to face with an American doctor, and I know no one believes this. His name was Dr. Gesundheit. No, you think I'm making it up? Listen, if you don't believe me, look him up in the physiology department of Stanford University. That's where he is now, promise. Anyway, Dr. Gesundheit, stay with me, looked at his notes and said, remember he's American, "Technically, you're dead. And if you're not dead, you should be in a torpor." He said torpor like that in a way that I've never forgotten. Torpor. "You've got to come in now before you die." So I did, and that saved my life. And as you can see, I found in this moment that shook me up more than I can describe, and still does sometimes, something absurd, something that helps me cope. Now push on another 18 years, and I'll keep this brief. The worst thing that has ever happened to me happened. I went into my son's bedroom, and he had died. He went to bed the night before with what I thought was flu, and in the morning he was dead. He had got what was then called meningococcal septicemia, usually called sepsis now. Now, what do you do with this? How can you go on even thinking that you might be happy or even have the right to be happy? The answer, if there is an answer, is many things, many times, on and on and on. One thing is that I was lucky enough to have come from that background that I described, one that told and retold life stories and life sayings. Another is that all of us related to Eddie, that's his name, have talked about him, retold his jokes. I've written about him many times. One of these happened because I was at the Edinburgh Book Festival about a year after Eddie died, and I'd just done a show and was taking questions. There were the ones I'm usually ready for, like, where'd you get your ideas from, or what's your favorite poem? When one girl asked, "What's become of Eddie, who's in your poems, in your book, Quick, Let's Get Out of Here?" And I had to say, he died. But at that moment, I thought that I owed it to that child and to other children who had read that book to say what happened and how I feel about it. So I sat down a day or so later and wrote just that, what I feel about it. I sent it off to Walker Books with the message, "Is this a book?" They said yes, and hooked me up again with the wonderful Quentin Blake, and that's how the sad book came about. Well, what has this done for me? It's helped me describe feelings that seemed indescribable. Back with the release and relief, isn't it? But also it's become a book that people share and people tell me about their lives. This means that I'm not alone, because one of the things about the death of someone you love is how lonely you feel. I felt deserted, even rejected. I know that sounds daft, but that's one of the feelings I had. To write about it has connected me to others and to dispel feeling deserted and rejected. Something else I did was study meningitis. I became greedy to know how it is we human beings coexist with this bacterium most of the time, but there are occasions when it escapes from its home in our throats and spreads to the membranes round our brains, or as it can, get into the bloodstream where it flourishes, multiplies, and in the end, that's what killed Eddie. I asked a doctor friend, would Eddie have known what was happening? No, he said. It happened in his sleep when the antigens produced by the bacterium destroyed the membranes round his cells and turned his insides to mush. You may be surprised. This comforted me. What had happened was not something weird or mysterious. He had been taken away or that he had been taken away as part of some hateful act against him or me or our family. It was a very normal part of how we coexist with bacteria and viruses. I learnt that what's difficult about loved ones dying is not death, it's grief. We do many things with Eddie. We have big family meals at the anniversary of his death. There are places where he's remembered, like Arsenal Football Club, where outside on the stadium walls, he and I are on the mural. And the guys he used to play hockey with hold an annual Eddie Steele-Rosen memorial hockey match on the very ground where he used to play. There are all his old mates now with careers, children, some of the old jokes, some with new ones. The coach, Freddie, blows a whistle. We have a minute's silence. We say a few words. We play. Well, I don't. His old friend Darren, who couldn't speak when he came to see me back on the day after Eddie died, does his cartwheels. And last time, John's father from Jamaica tells me in the car that when he heard that Eddie died, he couldn't believe it. No, he couldn't believe it. All connections. Only last week, I met up with Eddie's old friend Dave. It was the first time we had met since Eddie died. We both sat there wondering why we hadn't met before. Dave was clearly disturbed. He tried to tell me that he was sorry that he hadn't been in touch. He was sorry that he couldn't speak about it. He was sorry that he didn't understand himself. Then he told me two of Eddie's jokes. Both of them are too rude to repeat. He assured me that Eddie had worked very hard on making them up. That was Eddie. I was in touch with Eddie at that moment. It was a lot to take in one short chat. Lots of images of Eddie at his happiest with one of his best friends. On the way home on the bus, I had strange feelings. I could feel that I was emotional. But what emotions were they? I was sad happy. Of course I was sad. This had been about what I had lost. But then I was happy that I'd met someone who cared so much about Eddie that for the previous 25 years he had found it impossible to meet up with me in a casual way. Dave was also kind enough to ask how I was feeling having had COVID. He had, in a way, he said, kept in touch with me by reading about me in the paper. I told him that that COVID experience was a very odd thing to happen, and there were times that I thought about Eddie. I was put into an induced coma. At hospital, they'd run out of other ways of trying to help me get over COVID, so they took me to a place where there were some doctors standing by my bed. "Will you sign this piece of paper which will let us put you to sleep?" one said. "Will I wake up?" I said. "You've got a 50-50 chance," the doctor said. "And if I don't sign," I said. "Zero," he says. "That means no chance of waking up." I thought, "Yeah, I'll sign," I said. Actually, I had two other thoughts. When he said 50-50, I thought, not so bad. It seemed quite reasonable at the time. My other thought was about Eddie. I thought, if I'm asleep, it'll be like Eddie. I won't know I'm going, so there's nothing to worry about. So as you can see, in that split second, I did something that has educated me a lot. If you think the right things, you can push the worst feelings away. Any sense of dread about what might happen to me was pushed away by my knowledge that I wouldn't know about it. I have to thank Eddie for that. Not in any way that he would have wanted, of course. Far, far, far from it. But then, 40 or so days later, I woke up. I gather it had been touch and go. The consultant said, "We thought you might be brain dead." I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me at the time?" And he said, "Well, there's no point. We thought you were brain dead." So. In fact, I didn't wake up. My wife woke me up. The consultant had run out of ideas on how to get me out of the coma, so they asked Emma in. They wheeled me out of the intensive care unit onto the 4th floor atrium, and she held my hand and played recordings of our children and my older children into my ear off her phone. I was unconscious, though, and she tells me that I did wave my hand when I heard one of our children talking. If that was my then teenage son, I'm a bit bemused by that, because at the time he was going through the not talking phase. So maybe he just said, "Hi, Dad," and left it at that. Anyway, according to the consultant, that was the game changer. I woke up. Now, I don't remember any of this. One of the curious things about this whole episode is that I have about 6 to 7 weeks, possibly 8, a few days more, that are completely wiped from my life. Even the stuff when nurses and doctors tell me I was talking. The first thing I remember was a nurse, Evangelina, coming to my bed and saying, "You're on puree. It says so over your bed." I tried to look round, but I couldn't. She said, "What do you want?" I said, "What have you got?" She said, "Cottage pie." I said, "I'll have that." She came back with it. "Can you feed yourself?" she said. I tried. I couldn't lift my arm up. "No," I said. So she fed me. I said, "This is amazing. It's wonderful." I think she thought I was taking the mick. No one had ever said before that her pureed cottage pie was amazing. No, I said, "I love that, thanks. And thanks for feeding me." "Well, it is my job," she said. If I'd gone to Patton, I might be traumatized by the drugs they put in me to sedate me and paralyze me. It happens. In fact, I had several visits from psychologists who asked me if I was hallucinating. Was I having horrifying dreams and visions? I said, "I keep dreaming about a German Christmas party where the people there say they've got berries that they throw in the air. And when they burst," they said, "we sing songs." Sure enough, I said, they threw the berries up in the air and pew, pew, they exploded. And you could see them in the night sky. And then we sang, "Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht." The psychologist said, I think he was looking for something a bit more traumatic than that. Then 2 guys from Liverpool came to my bedside and said, "We're going to get you to walk." And they pulled me out of the bed and I went, fell on the floor. So they went away. A physiotherapist said that I had to lie in bed and squeeze my bum cheeks together. That didn't work either. So I went to a rehabilitation hospital. One man said they would teach me how to stand up and walk in 3 weeks. I didn't believe him. And another man came to my bedside who had been in the Greek army. He smacked his hands together and said, 1, 2, 3, let's go. And I said, "Go where? I can't move." So he was gently pushed to one side, and yes, they taught me how to walk in 3 weeks: Zimmer frames, wheelchairs, cycling machines, sticks, weights in the gym. I remember the glorious moment when I was first able to walk to the loo without a stick. To do it, I sang to myself that M People hit, "Search for the hero inside yourself." And as I sat on the loo, I wondered, how many people in the history of the world have got themselves to a loo singing, "Search for the hero inside yourself"? One guy at the rehab hospital said to me one day, "Hey, Mike, I'm going to bunk off this afternoon." I said, "What are you going to bunk off from?" Conversation I've been thinking about ever since. It's made me think about education. Who is education for? When you're at school, at least when I was at school, it's very easy to think that the reason why teachers teach you is because they get a kick out of it. But here in this gym in the rehab hospital, it was clear to me that I was doing learning for me. So what were the teachers there doing? The occupational therapists, the physiotherapists? I got it. They were helping me help myself. Yes, that's what all education should be. Help you help yourself. Mind you, one guy was told off. "Peter," the nurse said, "your urine is dark." And he replied, "The times are dark." So lovely Peter. So I learned to walk. I went home. My grown-up sons come over to take the dad for a walk. I don't have a lead. I don't run off. And I don't sniff other dads. Yes, I may have lost most of the sight from one eye and the hearing from one ear, but people come up to me and say, "You're alive." And I don't quite know what to say. I mean, I remember first I said, "Yes." And then I start to wonder, what if they said, "You're alive," and I said, "No." Or, "You're alive," and I say, "How do you know?" No, I don't say those things, really. And I've learned that I'm not less, I'm different. Yes, I'm not less, I'm different. Anyway, look, I've given you a taste of how I stay happy. When I talk like this, some people are dissatisfied. They say, "But what do you do if you feel defeated or depressed?" I think about that. I've mentioned some of it already. I talk. You've noticed that. I write, you know that, and I've said why. I also do stuff. I'm very, very lucky. People ask me to do things. I'm busy. Being busy is very important. I stretch. I like stretching. I do lots of stretches. I try to imitate our cats and listen to people who tell me new stretches and try those. I know that some people find going to sleep very hard and quite depressing. I've worked out some great going to sleep tricks. If there's time, I'll share those with you. And something else. I tell children that writing comes from our 5 senses. 5 senses plus imagining and remembering. So that's 7 things. And these are rich places to think about. But when it comes to living, you can't live in the past or the future. You can't live in the imagining and remembering. You can only live in the now. You live in the now with what you've got, all the stuff that's happened to you and all the stuff you've done, sure, but now is where you live. The poet Philip Larkin once wrote, "Days are where we live." I think that's right. The time span of what you can think and do seems to be about one day. We are alive in the day. Days are where we do things. This is not a new idea. It's a very, very old idea, but it's one that I believe in. I also believe in another very old idea, the one that the poet John Donne said, "No man is an island. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. And therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." I've given this talk in the context of terrible conflicts. People are doing terrible things to people. The late, great poet Benjamin Zephaniah, I believe some of his close relatives are here tonight, wrote, "People need people." He was so right. But he wrote that in the face of people being horrible to people and people killing people. What he knew, though, is that if we go on doing that, we will destroy ourselves. In fact, I could say that I'm pretty sure that Benjamin would say it too, that if we don't act on his idea that people need people, we will never be happy. And who knows, it's possible there won't be any people. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you.